Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for coming early in the morning here on this second day of the ministerial meeting at the OECD for the presentation of the Services Trade Restrictiveness Index. As you can see, we have an excellent panel going to present the index to you. We'll start with Ken Ash, the Director of Trade and Agriculture at the OECD, who will give you a brief rundown on the index. You all have copies of it, I believe, and there are extras if anyone doesn't have one, so please ask. Afterwards, we'll have comments from the distinguished panel here. Michael Froman, the U.S. Trade Rep, will speak. Andrew Robb, Minister of Trade and Investment from Australia. Ed Fass, the Minister of International Trade in Canada. Ildefonso Guajardo, the Secretary of Economy in Mexico, and Jean-Luc Demarty, the Director General for DG Trade for the EU. I'm going to turn it right over immediately to Ken. After the presentation and the introductory remarks from the ministers, we'll obviously take questions from the media. Ken?
Thank you, Larry, and good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here to make available publicly a new regulatory database governing services sectors, as well as a composite index that quantifies the degree of trade restrictiveness of existing services regulations. The abbreviation is STRI, Services Trade Restrictiveness Index. You need to get to know that. It's much easier to say STRI. It's an index that covers 40 countries. It covers 18 services sectors and about 80% of global services trade. What we've done essentially is provide governments with a snapshot of their regulatory environment as it governs the services sectors in question. And we've provided them that snapshot of themselves relative to the average across the population of 40 countries and relative to best practice. So obviously this allows countries to benchmark their own performance. It allows trade negotiators to identify bottlenecks, and it allows businesses to anticipate some of the requirements that they will face as they try to enter foreign markets. I want to be very clear, we are not prescribing specific country solutions. This is not about prescription. This is about helping governments to identify their own areas of underperformance and helping them to identify better policy alternatives. But the decisions remain for governments to make, and they can do that, of course, unilaterally, they can do it plurilaterally, they can do it multilaterally, or they can not do it at all. But they now have the information upon which they can make those decisions. Just one very brief word, and I'm not going to enter into the substance. No country is always the best. No country is always the worst. There is a very wide dispersion around the average levels of restrictiveness across the 40 countries. What that means, of course, the bad news is there's a wide dispersion. The good news is there are plenty of opportunities to improve performance. We have, as Larry has said, significant material available. We have thanks to our ITN group here at the OECD, who've done a Herculean task. You have a fantastic database that's available to you now. You can get in there, it's current. The data is up to 2014. It is interactive. You take a look and enjoy yourself. And with that, I'll turn the floor over to Ambassador Froman.
Well, thank you very much, Ken. And it's a pleasure to be here today for the official launch of the OECD Services Trade Restrictiveness Index. I'd like to join everybody in congratulating Ken and the rest of the OECD Trade and Agriculture Division for their tireless efforts since 2007 to create a database that covers more than 16,000 laws and regulations for 18 sectors in 40 countries. The United States is currently participating and playing a leading role in a negotiation to open up the world services market, and the index is a key tool that will not only support that negotiation, but will support future opening of the global services market. 80% of American jobs are in the services sector, and we have a services surplus with our trading partners. This index will identify and help us unlock the remaining global barriers, consistent with our efforts to support more jobs at home. It's important to note that the index includes data from key non-OECD countries, including Brazil, China, India, Indonesia, and South Africa. Each of these countries have rapidly growing and evolving economies, and we expect them to become increasingly important parts of the international services market. We're pleased to note that 5 non-OECD countries have already expressed an interest in becoming index participants, and we look forward to discussing their participation in the work program going forward. As noted in the STRI policy brief, services account for 80% of employment and 75% of GDP in OECD countries, and between 40 and 70% on both those accounts in major emerging economies. We also know that services trade accounts for nearly half of all value-added exports, including over 30% of total value added in manufacturing goods. The 18 sectors examined in this work so far capture the most important value chain sectors, including distribution, logistics, finance, communication, and other business and professional sectors. And the index will only be strengthened through the addition of additional sectors and subsectors in the future. We support the maintenance of this database as a living database that will continuously be updated to reflect changes in laws and regulations as they occur, ensuring that the database retains its relevance and value long into the future. And from our perspective, the real value of the index will be derived from its use as a tool for trade and investment analysis, which will lead to effective policy reforms and economic gains through trade negotiations. Through the development of quantitative measurements, we will now have a new capability to undertake the kind of analytical work in services that's been done for many years in the goods trade and meld that work together to obtain additional insights. We certainly have our work cut out for us if we're to eliminate barriers in trade to services, and we look forward to working through TISA and our bilateral and regional engagements to open up services trade. We know that doing so will bring enormous benefits to our economies and our people, and we're grateful to the OECD today for making a major contribution to that effort.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Mike, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Could I start by just acknowledging last night's dinner? I think if there was an index for Ministerial Council dinners, the Japanese hosted dinner last night would be at the top of the index. So I think I speak for everyone. It was a wonderful night. Delighted to be part of this launch, and I do endorse all the comments that Mike Froman has just made. In Australia, we are very strong supporters of this index. We do consider it quite a powerful tool for both increasing transparency of regulations and the capacity, as Mike was saying, for that to influence negotiations and government pressure, but it also will provide and inform our businesses who are looking to do and identify opportunities in overseas markets. I think it's true to say that once you get transparency in these regulations, you do put a great discipline on governments, a lot of pressure on governments. Governments can hide behind a lot of practices that have been in place for a long, long time. And many times we all become accustomed to the restrictions on services. You start to assume that that's the way it is. And you don't think about whether it could be different. And are there benefits? Are we overdoing it? What are the benefits of removing some or all of these restrictions? Now, the thing about the index, it will shine a light on how all of our countries compare with others. And we might think we're going well in lots of areas, and we might be, but then the index will help identify things that, again, we had overlooked as a country. So I think it's an excellent tool, and it really will, I think, help develop quickly the significance of the uptake of or removal of regulations in services. As Mike said, it is where the jobs are. In fact, in Australia, 4 out of every 5 jobs are in the services sector. It is a predominant sector of especially all the developed world, but increasingly of the developing world. And as the developing world develops, there is a great urgency, often which is not understood, again in the developing world, as it is not sometimes in the developed world, about the benefits of moving quickly to a service-based economy, because that's where the jobs are. And, in many parts of the developing world, there are serious numbers of population and young people who are looking for opportunities. And the quicker they get to a service-based economy, the quicker they will be able to satisfy those ambitions and the quality of life ambitions that legitimately every person on this earth should have. We look forward to this index being extended to further sectors, and in particular to education services, which I think again are central to accelerating and supporting the rapid growth we're starting to see in many developing countries. We also look forward to being extended to more economies. From our selfish point of view, perhaps, the ASEAN countries would be a great contributor. They are a real growing force certainly in our region, but in the world. And you get countries like Indonesia, which within 10 years will have a GDP bigger than Germany. A sort of not fully recognised fact of what's happening in that part of the world. So the extension of this index to some of these sorts of countries will greatly accelerate those opportunities. I'm certain that businesses in Australia and elsewhere will find it an extremely valuable tool. Again, I congratulate everyone involved, the OECD. It's another one of their highly relevant pieces of armoury, if you like, that has been provided to us. And the thing that struck me over the last couple of days, as I've read lots of the literature, it's not just, theoretically strong, but it is also immensely usable for politicians like ourselves. It gives the work that's being done out of this place is, I think, to be greatly commended, and this is another great example of it. Thank you.
Thank you. I also am very pleased to join my colleagues from the US, from Mexico, from the EU as well, and Australia to highlight this new tool that's been given to us from the OECD, the Services Trade Restrictiveness Index, which we're going to refer to as STRI. Canada is a nation built on trade, like Australia, like the United States, and like the EU, and like most other countries around the world. We strongly support trade liberalization, both regionally and globally. Since our government took office in 2006, Canada has actually concluded free trade agreements with no less than 38 countries, bringing the total to 43. Now, today's announcement on services underscores the commitment all of us share to further liberalizing trade to create jobs and economic growth for the people that we serve. As has already been noted, the service sector is growing and is a vital component of all of our economies. In Canada, like the other countries represented at this table, it represents essentially 4 out of 5 jobs. In Canada, over 15% of our exports are related to services. But I would caution everyone not to lay too much importance on those figures, because they really don't tell the whole story. And I note that not long ago, the OECD, together with the WTO, also did some excellent work on the TIVA, Trade and Value Added, which highlighted how important imports are in terms of driving competitiveness in our economies, and highlights also the role the services play in that. And today's work builds on that. One of the reasons why Canada played such an active role in helping develop the OECD STRI is because we want to know more about the role that services trade plays in our own economy and where we fit into the larger global economic context. The results of the index demonstrate the openness and competitiveness of Canada's services sector and the value we place on ensuring the smooth flow of services exports across our borders. In fact, Canada fared better than the average in 12 of the 18 services sectors. Obviously, we are pleased with that result, but note that there is still significant room for improvement. And I believe there's not one party that looks at this new tool that will not be able to identify areas of improvement. I can assure everyone that we as a country will continue to work to improve our own outcomes in these areas. As well, Canada looks forward to continuing its work with other OECD members to further improve and refine this particular index, while expanding it to include more services sectors and countries. In particular, the environmental services and logistics sectors are logical candidates for future inclusion in the index. And similarly, the database should include all countries that are presently or in the future become part of the TISA negotiations. And I'd be glad to consider all the ASEAN countries as well, which my colleague from Australia noted. Canada is committed to remaining an active participant in the trade and services agreement negotiations, which complement other trade agreements that we have negotiated to date and are negotiating going forward. Transparency is an important element for our services trade negotiators and for exporters, investors, and importers. In order to tackle barriers to trade effectively, services trade negotiators need accurate, up-to-date information on each country's regulations, which have a bearing on the free flow of trade and services. So today's announcement of the Services Trade Restrictiveness Index is yet another tool in a suite of products that allows the OECD to act as one of the world's leading catalysts in trade liberalization. So Canada very much looks forward to utilizing this new tool. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Good morning to all of you. I join my colleagues in congratulating OECD for this new tool, the STRI index. This analytical tool represents a great opportunity to continue discovering areas where there is still place to improve the way we exchange goods and services. I agree with Mike Froman in the fact that the interrelationship between services and goods in the manufacturing sector is essential. 30% of manufacturing now depends on services, and therefore for the future of manufacturing, which is a very important sector in Mexico, we really appreciate this new tool. I'm sure that the insights that the index provides will be helpful to assess and direct public policies for creating a less restrictive environment in which trade and services definitely will flourish. The overall result of STRI for Mexico broadly reinforces the analysis we have done domestically to undertake far-reaching structural reforms, which include sectors as important as telecommunications, broadcasting, financial, and energy services. Just to give you an example of one of those reforms in telecommunications, basically the reform is aimed to encourage competition in the marketplace. It is essential to have more market players, foreign and domestic, and more services at competitive prices. The reform includes 100% legalization for foreign investment in telecommunications. It will also ensure universal coverage, enhancing access to faster and reliable services, as well as a greater diversity of content. It will also increase fixed, mobile, and wireless penetration of broadband access. As you can see, enhancing competition in services activities is high in the Mexican economic agenda. Our main objective has been driven by the conviction that enhancing competition in services will allow Mexico's economy to become more productive and competitive. In this regard, the new index is a comprehensive atlas of the service trade restrictions at the national level and by activity. The information allows each country to benchmark its services activities in both in absolute terms and also with relation to global best practices. One will quickly see where the outlier restrictions are and where potential bottlenecks exist. It is clear for me, in Mexico, we still have a lot to do, but I believe that in a short period of time, we have covered a very substantial ground that was long overdue. I reiterate my congratulations to OECD for this groundbreaking project and encourage all countries involved to keep working in updating and improving this tool. This is a living instrument that we have to procure and strengthen. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to thank the OECD for having us together today at the milestone of this ambitious, very ambitious project. This OECD Services Trade Restrictiveness Index is a huge endeavor. It provides internationally comparable information on regulatory policies, in 40 countries across 18 sectors. This will be a unique tool for policymakers to identify areas of regulatory strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities for improvement. For more than 15 years have passed since the GATT inception, and the economic importance of services in terms of production, income, employment, and trade has continued to rise. Most WTO members have autonomously removed certain barriers to trade in services in many services sectors, for example, in postal and courier services or telecommunication services, and thus there appears to be ample scope for expansion of this activity. The World Development Indicator shows that the service sector accounts for more than 70% of global GDP, as it is expanding at a quicker rate than the agriculture and manufacturing sectors. Moreover, trade in services is growing at a pace faster than traded goods since the 1980s. But services such as logistics, design, and transportation are much more important to global commerce if we measure them in value-added terms. It has already been evoked by some. So the apparent traditional measure of trade in services represent around 25% of traditional imports-exports. But when we're adding these elements, and if we reason in value-added, we see that it's around 50%, including the domestic services incorporated in goods. So it shows that services are already, even in trade, quite essential for our economy. So they are not, services are not only important as economic activity in itself, but also as a driver for other productive sectors. So in developing countries, trade in services has become crucial for development strategies, and the OECD has produced some remarkable analysis on this in the framework of its work on global value chains that have been mentioned. So another element, trade in services, has also demonstrated relative resilience in the latest financial economic crisis, lower magnitude of decline, and early recovery from the crisis. So, such resilience has led many countries to incorporate trade in services into their post-crisis growth strategies. So as far as the EU is concerned, I will be very brief. It's clear that for the EU, its services are essential in our strategy, our domestic strategy, our trade strategy, and they represent a very important part of our trade negotiations. There will be bilateral or plurilateral or multilateral. So, and we are happy that the indexes demonstrate that the EU openness in services, even though importantly the OECD STRI does not account for the EU intra-EU liberalization. This means that probably EU scores at somewhere a bit underrated because of this element. And I would like also to recall that the trade in services since 2009, since the Lisbon Treaty, is an exclusive EU competence at a very, very limited exception, and also depending on the EU developing competence on that, on transport. So finally, let me finalize by paying tribute to the dedication of the OECD Secretariat, who has brought this lengthy project to maturity. Members and key partners will now be endowed with solid tools to examine how services can best contribute to domestic reform and foster growth. So, and this project also has the potential to inform international services negotiation in a context of renewed activity. I'm sure that in the next months we'll start seeing practical examples of how STRI helps negotiators to grasp the economy effects on services liberalization. I'm having worked a lot in agriculture in my past, I remember a lot how OECD was important to trigger a negotiation in Iran on agriculture with the famous AMS. So I hope the same success for STRI in the future. Thank you very much.